I'm so pleased to welcome on the set of PCN Life today for our Writer's Block segment, Maureen Boyle, who is, you'll tell us all about your background, but we're going to talk about this book that you wrote, Shallow Graves, The Hunt for the New Bedford Serial Killer. I loved it. I finished it this morning. It was a terrific book. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this in the first place.
I was a newspaper reporter, crime reporter for the Standard Times of New Bedford. That's a daily newspaper in New Bedford, covering what's now called the South Coast.
Yeah.
And I was doing a lot of work covering stories of drug addiction,
Yes.
prostitution, and the drug scene in that area, in
Yep.
addition to murder, what I call murder and mayhem, and
Right.
a little bit of court reporting.
And this was in the late 80s?
This was in the late 80s.
Early to late 80s, okay.
This happened in 1988. 11 women went missing in 1988, but they did not all go missing at the same time.
Right.
It was a very, very slow process. Some of the women were reported missing right away. Some of the women were never reported missing.
Right.
So there was no big aha moment early on for law enforcement and even the general public to say, oh, there's a serial killer on the loose.
Right.
That was not what was going on at that time.
Right.
Unfortunately. So there wasn't a major alarm early
Right.
on.
There weren't like 10 bodies found at once and
No.
say, uh-oh,
No.
all of a sudden. Right.
Yeah.
So when you were researching this book, you lived in the area during this time, so you were involved in it.
And I was covering the story.
And you were covering the story. And the story wasn't, like you said, it wasn't just aha, it was bit by bit and piece by piece. Yeah. Other things would happen. How long did it take from the first body to the 9th body that were found?
The first body was found in July,
Yeah,
the 4th of
88.
July weekend, 88, and the last body was found in April of 1989. Yeah. However, all of the women went missing roughly between, they believe, March of 88 and September of 88. So it was a very short period of time where the women went missing, but they weren't all found. Right away.
Right. And a lot of them wouldn't have been found had not from really strange circumstances of people just happened to wander into a certain section of the woods, but they were all kind of dumped right off the highway.
Most of the women were found along Route 140 in Freetown, 195 in Dartmouth, and one woman was found on 195 in Marion.
Right.
And one woman was found on Route 88 in Westport. That's the main road going into Horseneck Beach.
Right.
And then there was one woman from the Cape who was found in a gravel pit off the Reed Road exit on I'd say about a quarter of a mile from the highway, the gravel pit.
But they were all generally in the same type of situation,
area.
right?
Yes, yeah. They were all found. If you were driving from point A to B to C to D, it would all be within, I'd say, a 15-minute drive.
Right, right. So clearly it was in a specific area where these murders, or we're not sure where the murders happened.
No, but this is where the women were found. All the women were found outside of New Bedford. They were all believed to have last been seen in New Bedford, but none of the bodies were found in New Bedford. They were all found along the highways circling the city.
Right. Now, back in the late 80s, there was no DNA the way we have it now.
No.
It was very, even the computer systems that the law enforcement could rely on were very archaic compared to today's. So what were some of the things that really struck you as being such a deficit to them not being able to do what they could do today?
I mean, during that period of time, of course, when you're living it, it's the norm. You know, during 1988, most people didn't have cell phones, which is today you'd say, what do you mean there was no cell phones? Yeah. People would use pay phones, and so they really did have some major deficits for the investigation. They didn't have the same tools that you have today. There wasn't the same number of surveillance cameras.
Sure.
There weren't, most people didn't have cell phones. And as a result, people weren't taking videos of people everywhere. Even getting the DNA sampling at that time, generally they needed very large samples. A lot of the samples were destroyed in the testing process.
Yeah.
That whole idea of touch DNA was really very, very it was almost like science fiction to
Right,
a lot
at that
of members
point.
of law enforcement. Even something as simple as fingerprints. They were at that time still in the process of developing a uniform computerized system for searching the fingerprints in the state.
Right.
So not all fingerprints were in the system, not all police departments were entering fingerprints.
Exactly.
And not all police departments were fingerprinting all suspects.
Right. So there just wasn't any consistency whatsoever.
Not at all.
So the law enforcement that started on working on these cases literally had to do the old-fashioned gumshoe. They had to find witnesses, and even where the women disappeared or where people thought they were last seen, that was something that had to be corroborated through a number of witnesses. There wasn't, like you said, there wasn't a camera that showed this person just left.
Exactly. And because the women were found weeks and many months after they were missing, after they were last believed to have seen, it was very, very hard to determine exactly when they were last seen and who saw them.
Right.
And some of the witnesses, they remembered seeing the person, but they didn't have a date.
Right.
Some of the women's friends, didn't have normal jobs, so they couldn't pinpoint times and dates.
Right.
What they could pinpoint was, it was before Mother's Day, or it was shortly after my kid's birthday.
Right.
It was the day before they violated my probation.
Right.
Certain things like that.
So the women that did go missing, a lot of them were prostitutes and drugs.
All of the women who went missing were addicts.
They were all
and
addicts.
that was really the unifying element here. They were all addicts, primarily heroin addicts, and cocaine was also very big at that time. But they were deep into their addiction.
Right. So that entire group of people, or their atmosphere that they lived in and they worked in, wasn't conducive to a good lifestyle or a safe lifestyle for any of them.
Then as in today, if you are if you're in a drug lifestyle, it can be very, very dangerous.
Right.
And the people that they knew were all drug addicts. And even today, some people make a big deal about all these women knew each other.
Right.
And I liken it to, yes, because they were all drug addicts, and New Bedford is a very small city, and people know each other.
Right.
And just as nurses know nurses, teachers know teachers, when people are in a drug culture, they know other people in the drug culture. And when you look at a small city like New Bedford, many people would know them because of large families, and people stay put in a small community.
Now, what was really depressing, actually, about the end of this book is that we didn't really get closure. There were suspects, but there never was anyone convicted of any of this. Speak to that.
And that is something that I think is very, very frustrating for the investigators, and it's heart-wrenching for the families. I really hope that in the next year or so, that someone will come forward and will be able to provide investigators enough information so that they can positively identify who the killer is. That way the families will know.
Right.
I don't like to use the word closure because it's used so often, and there really is no closure for the families because it is still an open wound.
It's more justice.
Yeah. So we can also know who is responsible for these deaths.
Right. Now, as time goes by and memories fade, so the longer the time goes by, the worse chances we actually have of finding who actually did this. But the DNA, the technology we have today is far superior. So that what is the hope between what you talked with the investigators that were involved? What is their hope that will come?
That someone will finally come forward, because people's lives change over 30 years. Someone who may have been in a drug culture, drug lifestyle 30 years ago, today they may be clean, they may be, they have a family, they have children, they're out of perhaps an abusive relationship, they feel safer to come forward. And that's the hope, that someone who knows who the killer is or who holds that key
Right.
will come forward and
it's
and tell them.
assumed that there is somebody out there who knows.
I think
It's pretty
there is.
hard to imagine that there isn't.
Yeah, I think that there is someone who knows.
Yeah, and the two likely suspects, if you read through the book, and all the evidence kind of pointed towards them, but it wasn't conclusive enough that you could actually charge them with the crime or convict them of the crime.
Yeah,
It wasn't
there
conclusive enough.
was never any evidence to convict anyone
Right.
Of a crime. And what is really kind of scary about this case is that while there were 2 or 3 main suspects during this period of time, there were so many other suspects that law enforcement looked at that people didn't know about. And when you think about how many people could have been the killer, that is really frightening.
Right.
Or you could, it could be someone who's at church, your next door
Yep,
neighbor.
yep.
You just don't know.
Now, it was mentioned in here, not by name, somebody who was in the service, somebody who was a police officer. Will those names ever be brought forward so that if there is a person out there who knows who did it?
I debated whether to name some of those individuals, and I did decide, no, it's not fair to them.
Right.
They number one, they were never charged.
Right.
Their names never came out in any court documents or anything like that. So once if they're the killer, then their name would come out.
Right.
But
we'll only know if someone comes forward,
Yes,
basically.
yeah.
That's the only way we'll ever know. A fascinating book, a fascinating read. Again, it's called Shallow Graves by Maureen Boyle, The Hunt for the New Bedford Serial Killers. I'm so glad I read it because it brought it all back to me. I remember reading all about it, and you do forget about things over time. And the fact that it was never solved is really frightening.
It is very, very frightening. It's frightening to me.
Sure.
I mean, I drive by those highways, and I still wonder.
Yeah. What happened?
Because there's 11 women went missing, but only 9 of the women were found.
Right.
So there are 2 people who are still
Out there.
Yep. Both of them had ties to law enforcement. One was the daughter of a retired New Bedford police officer, and the other one, her mother's fiance was a Dartmouth cop. And they have never been found. And that is heartbreaking
Of course
for
it
their
is.
families.
So hopefully to be continued.
Yes.
Hopefully there will be an answer to this.
I hope
someday.
so. I hope so.
Thank you so much,
Oh,
Maureen.
thank you for having me.
This was a wonderful book and a great read, and an amazing amount of work went into this. Clearly, thank you so much.
Oh, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay.